The Yamaha XT500 from the late 1970s arrived looking almost too plain to change the world. Yet within just a few short years, it would prove itself as one of the most consequential motorcycles in off-road history. When you first see it, the XT500 doesn't shout for attention with wild paint or exotic engineering. Instead, it greets you with simplicity, a single-cylinder engine, air cooling, kickstart only, and a design philosophy that seemed more practical than glamorous. Yet under that quiet skin was a machine that would outlast, outperform, and outthink rivals in the harshest conditions imaginable. Its true proving ground wasn't a paved road or a showroom floor. It was the desert, the jungle, the unforgiving wild. And it was in the world's most brutal rally that the XT500 would forever etch its name into the story of endurance, grit, and what it truly means to build a motorcycle for survival rather than spectacle. This is the story of a humble Yamaha that conquered Dakar, shaped an entire generation of riders, and still today is remembered not just as a machine, but as a legend born from resilience. So before we dive deep into how the XT500 became an unlikely hero, go ahead and hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what bike you want to see us cover next. When the Yamaha XT500 first landed in 1976, it looked like an oddball against the rising tide of performance motorcycles. The decade was dominated by multi-cylinder machines that dazzled on the street. Yet Yamaha bet on something leaner, simpler, and almost stubbornly traditional. The XT500 wasn't about speed on smooth asphalt. It was about surviving conditions that would leave other motorcycles stranded. The first mini-beat in this journey is the backdrop. The US had already seen a boom in dirt bike culture, from motocross tracks to backyard trails, and riders wanted something they could ride to work during the week and take into the hills on weekends. Yamaha's gamble was that one machine could bridge that divide. Micro story. Imagine an American rider in 1977 who had spent years juggling two machines, a street bike for commuting and a scrappy dirt bike for fun. Suddenly, the XT500 arrives, with its rugged steel frame and 499cc single-cylinder thumper, promising both reliability and versatility. For that rider, it wasn't about winning a race on Saturday. It was about the freedom to explore fire roads, creek beds, and rocky climbs without a truck and trailer. It was liberation on two wheels. And word spread quickly in dirt bike circles that this Yamaha was more than just another option. It was a game changer. Context digest. Technically, the XT500 was nothing exotic. Four-stroke, air-cooled, two-valve head, and producing modest horsepower compared to the multi-cylinder road rockets of its day. But what it offered was torque down low, an easy-to-maintain layout, and a sense that even a roadside mechanic could keep it alive with basic tools. This was crucial in an era when complexity was creeping into motorcycles, and riders were starting to resent the feeling that their machines were smarter than they were. Micro story. In Europe, particularly France and Germany, the XT500's rugged charm translated into a cult following. It became the darling of overland adventurers who strapped panniers to the frame and disappeared across the Alps or down into Africa. Photographs from the late 70s show XT500s loaded with spare tires, fuel cans, and bedrolls parked against desert backdrops, their riders grinning with dusty satisfaction. Suddenly, Yamaha's humble enduro wasn't just a weekend plaything, it was a passport to the unknown. Reflection bridge. This is where the XT500's simplicity became more than engineering. It became philosophy. Context digest. Kickstarting the XT500 was famously tricky for beginners. The engine's high compression demanded a careful technique. Find top dead center, ease the lever, commit with force, and hope it fired. What frustrated some riders bonded others as they learned the ritual that felt like taming a beast. Once mastered, it was as much part of the bike's character as its torque-rich ride. In hindsight, even its quirks taught patience and respect, qualities that became invaluable in the Dakar deserts ahead. Micro story. By 1978, Yamaha's engineers couldn't have imagined just how far their simple single would travel. Riders began entering long-distance endurance events, testing the XT500 in conditions far beyond the dirt trails it was originally intended for. One rider after another discovered that while competitors' machines overheated, cracked, or seized, the XT500 just kept going, its air-cooled motor shrugging off abuse like it was designed for punishment. This resilience made it the perfect candidate for something bigger, the Paris-Dakar Rally. Reflection bridge. To understand why the XT500's leap into Dakar mattered, we need to step back and consider the cultural hunger for adventure motorcycles at that time. Context digest. In the late 1970s, Europe and America were both wrestling with economic uncertainty, fuel crises, and political upheaval. For many young people, the dream of adventure was a kind of escape, and motorcycles embodied that spirit. A machine like the XT500 tapped into fantasies of self-reliance, where you didn't need a convoy or backup crew, just courage, a map, and a few tools. In this context, Dakar was more than a race. It was a stage where that fantasy could be proven real. Micro story. When the Paris-Dakar Rally was first announced in 1979, few imagined that the Yamaha XT500 would dominate the inaugural running. But its riders, armed with little more than determination and lightly modified machines, cut across deserts and mountain ranges where more powerful motorcycles broke down. The XT500's combination of lightweight, mechanical simplicity, and robust suspension gave it a unique advantage. The race was a test of attrition, and the Yamaha outlasted everything else. This wasn't just a win for a motorcycle, it was a seismic shift in what riders expected from endurance machines. Micro story: the victory of the XT500 in the 1979 and 1980. Dakar wasn't merely a sporting achievement. It was a cultural one. Riders across the world suddenly saw the XT500 not as an entry-level enduro, but as a proven desert conqueror. Dealers couldn't keep up with demand, and the bike's reputation outpaced its horsepower figures. Magazines and newspapers hailed it as the unlikely champion, and Yamaha leaned into the moment, cementing the XT500 as the forefather of what would eventually be called the adventure bike segment. Micro story. Picture the mechanics in Dakar bivouacs during those years. Competitors' teams wrestling with complex carburetors and cracked frames, while XT500 riders casually adjusted chains or changed oil. The image of the unbothered Yamaha rider sipping coffee while rivals sweated over broken machines became part of the legend. The XT500 wasn't invincible, but it was close enough to feel like the desert was its natural home. And that was an image no marketing campaign could buy. Context digest. The Yamaha XT500's Dakar triumph created a blueprint. Endurance races weren't won by sheer horsepower, but by reliability, simplicity, and rider resilience. This forced other manufacturers to rethink their approach, and soon the entire category of dual-purpose and adventure motorcycles began to take shape. Without the XT500's victories, that shift might have taken years longer to happen. Micro story. Meanwhile, in the United States, the XT500 began attracting a cult of riders who wanted the Dakar mystique without ever leaving their hometowns. It was the motorcycle of choice for those who valued ruggedness over flash, and stories circulated of XT500s clocking 50,000 miles with minimal rebuilds. One owner recalled crossing entire states with nothing but a spare spark plug and a roll of duct tape, proof that the Yamaha could handle whatever the open road demanded. This grassroots loyalty made the XT500 not just a motorcycle, but a badge of identity. Reflection bridge. All of this momentum was pointing toward one inescapable conclusion. The XT500 wasn't just a bike of its time, it was the seed of a movement. The next phase of the story is how Yamaha capitalized on its Dakar success to evolve the XT500's DNA, setting the stage for future machines that would define the adventure category. The Yamaha XT500 carried its reputation into the 1980s with an aura that no amount of advertising could buy. By then, it wasn't just a motorcycle, it was shorthand for endurance and simplicity. The XT500 had won Dakar twice, proved itself on multiple continents, and built a following of riders who trusted it with their lives. Now the question was how Yamaha would leverage that momentum without losing what made the bike special. Micro story. Yamaha engineers faced a dilemma. The XT500's air-cooled single was nearly bulletproof, but emissions regulations and market demands were shifting. Instead of abandoning the core philosophy, Yamaha leaned into it, refining suspension, tweaking geometry, and slowly improving comfort. Yet every update carried the risk of diluting the pure character that had made the XT500 famous. In France, where the bike had practically become a national icon, fans resisted change, insisting the thumping single remain unchanged. This tension between progress and preservation defined the XT500's middle years. Context Digest. In the US, the XT500 attracted a different kind of loyalty. It wasn't the Dakar victories that sold most Americans. It was the rugged reality of owning a machine that could double as commuter, trail partner, and weekend escape pod. While rivals chased higher horsepower and fancier styling, Yamaha held ground with its less is more approach. For many Americans, the XT500 became the dependable friend in a garage, otherwise filled with temperamental machines. Reflection Bridge. This dual identity, desert champion abroad, loyal workhorse at home, gave the XT500 a rare cultural depth. Micro story. Consider the riders who attempted transcontinental adventures on XT500s in the early 1980s. With little more than a rolled-up map, extra fuel strapped to the rear, and a toolkit in the side pouch, they crossed jungles, deserts, and mountain passes, sometimes alone, sometimes in pairs. One story that circulated in rider circles told of an XT500 making it from Paris to Cape Town with no catastrophic failures. These stories weren't sponsored campaigns, they were campfire legends, and they reinforced the XT500's reputation as the motorcycle that would never abandon you. Context Digest. By this point, Yamaha's Dakar dominance had sparked a wave of imitators. Other manufacturers rushed to build their own rugged singles or twin-cylinder off-roaders, but the simplicity of the XT500 was hard to clone. Most competitors tried to add complexity in the form of bigger engines, advanced suspension, or fancy electronics, features that often broke down in the very conditions they were supposed to master. The XT500, with its minimalist DNA, kept reminding the world that sometimes less really is more. Microstory. Meanwhile, Yamaha's marketing team leaned heavily on the Dakar victories in Europe. While in the US, they framed the XT500 as the no-nonsense alternative for riders tired of chasing trends. Brochures featured dusty desert shots and headlines that emphasized toughness over flash. In both markets, the strategy worked, and sales remained strong through the early 1980s. Yet beneath the surface, change was inevitable. New technologies, rising consumer expectations, and a motorcycle industry always chasing novelty meant the XT500's days were numbered. Reflection Bridge. What mattered, though, was that by the time the XT500 began to fade from showrooms, it had already planted a seed that would grow into something bigger. Micro story. Yamaha understood that while the XT500 couldn't live forever, its DNA could. In 1983, they introduced the XT600, carrying forward the same philosophy with incremental modern touches. And soon after, the Tenere series took shape, explicitly borrowing the Dakar mystique and scaling it into a full-fledged adventure line. The original XT500 may have been retiring, but its influence was multiplying across Yamaha's lineup. Context Digest. For riders, this transition was bittersweet. The XT600 and Tenere promised more comfort and power, but they lacked the raw simplicity of the 500. Still, without the XT500, the entire adventure bike category as we know it, from weekend ADV tours to round-the-world expeditions, might look entirely different today. It wasn't just a motorcycle being replaced, it was a torch being passed. Microstory. Collectors began to realize this too. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, pristine XT500s were already gaining cult status. Vintage rallies and off-road festivals featured lines of the classic single-parked proudly alongside newer machines, and conversations always circled back to the same theme. Nothing quite captured the spirit of adventure like the original XT500. Its rarity and reputation elevated it from a tool to a treasure. Microstory. In America, used XT500s often stayed in families for decades, passed down from parents to children who learned to ride on their forgiving torque and sturdy frames. These hand-me-downs created new generations of enthusiasts who may never have watched a Dakar stage, but who knew the XT500 as their first taste of freedom. This continuity, stretching across families and years, gave the Yamaha an emotional resonance that outlived its production. Context Digest. The cultural wave the XT500 started spread far beyond Yamaha's walls. Magazines, adventure travel books, and even early films about desert expeditions used the XT500 as shorthand for rugged self-reliance. It became the visual language of off-road adventure, its silhouette instantly recognizable in a way most motorcycles could only dream of achieving. Reflection Bridge. And so the XT500, once just a modest thumper with kickstart quirks, became immortal by the sheer weight of its influence. The next stage of the story is how that immortality shaped the motorcycle landscape after the XT500, and why its legend continues to echo in modern machines long after the last unit rolled off the line. The Yamaha XT500 entered history books as more than a product. By the time its production wound down in the mid-1980s, the XT500 had already transformed into a legend, with a legacy that refused to fade. This motorcycle had proven in Dakar and in everyday ownership that simplicity could conquer extremes, and its shadow loomed large over everything that came after. Micro-story. In the decades following its retirement, enthusiasts continued to ride, restore, and showcase XT500s across Europe, the US, and beyond. Gatherings of vintage riders often placed the XT500 front and center, its reputation as the bike that could go anywhere, making it both a conversation starter and a nostalgic touchstone. Many who had owned one in the past longed to relive the feeling of kickstarting that thumping single, while newcomers admired it as a pure expression of motorcycle honesty. Context digest. The XT500's impact wasn't limited to nostalgia. It fundamentally changed how the industry approached adventure riding. Where manufacturers once focused on horsepower and top speed, they now emphasize durability, rider comfort on long journeys, and the capacity to handle diverse terrain. The XT500 was the catalyst for that shift, and even in modern ADV machines loaded with electronics, the echo of that air-cooled single remains. Micro-story. Consider the boom of adventure tourism in the 1990s and 2000s. From guided rides across Africa to solo expeditions in South America, the DNA of those journeys traces back to the Yamaha XT500. It was the proof of concept that showed a motorcycle could be both a daily companion and a globe-trotting explorer. Without it, the infrastructure of adventure travel might have developed much later, if at all. Reflection bridge. This is where the XT500 moves from being just a machine into being a cultural milestone. Context digest. Even Yamaha itself acknowledged this enduring influence, celebrating anniversaries of the XT500 with nods in design language, and ensuring that the Tenere and later adventure models carried spiritual cues from the original. Other manufacturers followed the same template, but no matter how sophisticated their designs became, they still owed a debt to the plain, reliable thumper that started it all. Micro-story. In the collector market, XT500 values began climbing steadily in the 2000s. Examples once left to rust in barns were suddenly worth rescuing, and pristine survivors commanded premiums. Part of that appeal came not from rarity alone, but from symbolism. Owning an XT500 meant holding a piece of the dawn of adventure motorcycling, a tangible link to Dakar glory and backyard trail rides alike. Micro-story. Beyond market values, the XT500 influenced rider identity. It wasn't about being the fastest or flashiest, but about projecting resilience and self-sufficiency. Photographs of riders with dusty XT500s at remote gas stations or campsites became iconic imagery, reinforcing a narrative that riding wasn't about showing off, but about discovering the world and yourself through the journey. Context digest. What makes the XT500 so enduring is that it proved a paradox. By being modest, it became mighty. By rejecting complexity, it became timeless. And by focusing on durability, it created memories that lasted generations. Those truths resonated long after the last XT500 rolled off the assembly line. Micro-story. In America, older XT500s are still cherished not only by collectors, but by working riders who keep them alive with parts scavenged from forums and swap meets. The fact that so many remain in running condition decades later is itself a testament to Yamaha's original design ethos. Seeing one chugging down a dirt road today feels less like spotting an old machine and more like glimpsing a piece of living history. Reflection bridge, which brings us to the ultimate takeaway. The Yamaha XT500 didn't just survive Dakar, it survived time. The final chapter of this story is understanding what that survival means today, both for riders looking back and for the motorcycle world moving forward. The Yamaha XT500 from 1976 through the mid-1980s proved that motorcycles don't need excess to achieve greatness. Its air-cooled thumper, rugged frame, and Dakar triumphs wrote a story of endurance that still resonates with riders today. When we look back, what stands out isn't just the victories or the sales numbers, but the cultural blueprint the XT500 left behind. For American riders, the XT500 embodied versatility at a time when most motorcycles demanded a choice between road or dirt. This Yamaha gave them both, and in doing so, it prefigured the dual sport and adventure categories that dominate modern catalogs. For European and African riders, the XT500 was something else entirely. A passport to the world, a machine that could cross deserts, jungles, and mountains with nothing but patience and a toolkit. It created the romance of long-distance overland travel that countless adventure bikes still chase. The real legacy of the Yamaha XT500 lies in how it bridged cultures and needs. It was a commuter in American suburbs, a conqueror in African dunes, and a cultural icon in Europe. Few motorcycles have managed to wear so many hats with authenticity, and fewer still have inspired entire genres of machines that followed. In ownership terms, the XT500 was never luxurious, but it was dependable. The ritual of the kickstart, the thump of the engine, and the confidence that it would always get you home became part of its identity. Even today, restored examples continue to deliver that experience, connecting modern riders to the same resilience their predecessors felt decades ago. Market reality reinforces this point. Collectors chase pristine XT500s, not just for rarity, but for what they symbolize. The birth of adventure motorcycling, the underdog that rewrote Dakar, the simplicity that beat sophistication. Their rising values reflect not only nostalgia, but respect for what the bike accomplished. Ultimately, the XT500 story matters because it taught the industry and riders alike that adventure isn't about the machine's limits, but about what the rider can do when the machine is honest, tough, and trustworthy. That lesson continues to echo in every modern adventure bike, from high-tech giants to minimalist singles, all of them following a path first blazed by Yamaha's humble thumper. And so the Yamaha X500 leaves us with this lasting truth. Greatness in motorcycling isn't always about speed or power. Sometimes it's about a bike that becomes a companion in the wild, a partner in discovery, and a legend that conquers not just deserts but time itself.